All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we are going to completely reconstruct the life, the behavior, and, well, the downright bizarre growth spurts of one of the most famous, yet honestly profoundly misunderstood dinosaurs in the entire fossil record. We're talking about the Pachycephalosaurus. In this explainer, we're going to walk through 10 mind-blowing facts that will absolutely challenge everything you thought you knew about this creature. I mean, from its iconic, thick-headed profile to its completely shifting identity. Get ready to see this incredible animal in a totally new light.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because you see, this isn't just your standard list of dinosaur traits. This is essentially a CSI Cretaceous detective story. For decades now, the image of the Pachycephalosaurus has been dominated by this one super dramatic idea: two massive dinosaurs lowering their heads and just crashing into each other at top speed, kind of like prehistoric bighorn sheep. But did the ultimate dinosaur battering ram actually use its head that way? Paleontologists have been debating this intensely, looking at microscopic bone structures, fossilized injuries, and shifting skull shapes to solve paleontology's absolute most famous dome-headed mystery.
So, let's kick things off with fact number 1, and it's all about that famous head. The name Pachycephalosaurus literally translates to thick-headed lizard. And that massive frontoparietal dome you see on mature adults? It was an astonishing 22 centimeters thick. That is nearly 9 inches of solid bone. This enormous crest sat right on top of the skull, safely cushioning the dinosaur's relatively tiny brain underneath. To put that into perspective for a second, the human skull is only about 1/4 of an inch thick. So this sheer, incredible density is exactly what sparked that whole battering ram theory in the first place.
But there is so much more to this animal than just its built-in helmet, which brings us to fact number 2, beyond the dome. While that massive crest gets all the glory, just look at the rest of its anatomy. They actually had forward-facing eyes, giving them binocular vision, which, is a trait we usually associate with predators. Inside those small muzzles, they had these tiny leaf-shaped teeth with serrated edges. That's led some scientists to wonder if they might have been omnivorous, maybe snacking on insects right alongside tough plants. They walked on 2 strong legs, had relatively small arms with 5-fingered hands, and this is key, an S-shaped or U-shaped neck. That neck shape becomes absolutely crucial when we talk about how they might have absorbed major physical impacts.
And that brings us perfectly to fact number 3, the origin of the head-butting myth. How did this specific idea become so baked into our minds? Well, it traces back to 1955, when a paleontologist named Edwin Colbert formally hypothesized that these dome-headed dinosaurs functioned as biological battering rams. He specifically compared them to modern bighorn sheep. But, amusingly enough, it wasn't actually the science that popularized this. This academic theory exploded into the public consciousness just a year later in 1956, thanks to a sci-fi story by L. Sprague de Camp called A Gun for Dinosaur. That's right. A science fiction story cemented the dramatic image of male Pachycephalosaurus violently clashing heads to establish dominance, and artists and filmmakers have relied on that exact image ever since.
But not everyone bought into the battering ram idea. Which brings us to fact number 4, the Great Combat Debate. In 2004, paleontologists John Horner and Mark Goodwin pushed back pretty hard against the headbutting theory. They actually looked at the internal microstructure of the bone and argued that the spongy, radiating structures inside the dome were transientory and honestly way too fragile for head-on hits. Instead, they proposed the dome was strictly for visual display, kind of like a peacock's feathers, or perhaps for flank butting, swinging their heads sideways into the ribs of a rival rather than crashing head-to-head like a pair of medieval knights.
Now, the debate certainly didn't end there, and that leads us to fact number 5, which comes with a massive forensic revelation. Researchers decided to play detective and look for actual trace evidence of behavior right on the fossils themselves. They examined over 100 Pachycephalosaur skulls, and what they found was startling. 22%, so nearly 1/4 of all adult Pachycephalosaur domes, hide a very violent secret.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what they found. A 2013 study led by Joseph Peterson mapped out these injuries. Notice that section taking up 22% of the chart? Those represent skulls scarred by osteopathic myelitis. That is a severe bone infection resulting from trauma. But the real smoking gun wasn't just that they were injured, it was where they were injured. These lesions were highly clustered right at the absolute thickest part of the apex of the dome. This strongly supports the head-butting combat hypothesis, suggesting these animals really were slamming their heads together, causing trauma that later got infected. Oh, and interestingly, the flat-headed morphs, which we think are juveniles or maybe females, completely lack these lesions. To understand how their skulls could even take that kind of punishment and how they developed in the first place, we need fact number 6, metaplastic bone. Okay, so the absolutely crucial point here is that a Pachycephalosaur skull was not just some static, unchanging rock. It was made of metaplastic fibrolamellar bone. This is a highly vascularized, dynamic tissue. Because of this really unique cellular makeup, their skulls were capable of rapidly growing, shifting, absorbing, and fundamentally changing the size and shape of their cranial ornaments as they aged. They were literally constantly remodeling their own heads.
And that incredible biological trick brings us to fact number 7. This is frankly one of the most mind-bending discoveries in modern paleontology, the teenage transformation. For years, scientists were totally convinced they had 3 different dinosaur species living together. First, there was Dracorex, which had this flat head covered in dragon-like spikes. Then there was Stygimoloch, which had a small, narrow dome flanked by huge spikes. And finally, the adult Pachycephalosaurus, with a massive, smooth dome and just little blunt nodes. But in 2009, John Horner and his team proved they aren't separate species at all. Thanks to that metaplastic bone we just talked about, Dracorex is actually just a juvenile. Stygimoloch is the awkward teenager, and Pachycephalosaurus is the fully mature adult of the exact same species.
Fact number 8 shows us exactly how scientists figured this out. Now, what's really interesting about this is the texture clues. If you look closely at the bone texture of the so-called Stygimoloch, it's rough and rugose. This meant it was spongy, full of blood vessels, and actively remodeling under the skin. Its squamosal bones at the back of the skull were robust to anchor those huge spikes. But as the animal grew into the adult Pachycephalosaurus, that active growth finally subsided. The dome inflated and basically absorbed those lateral bones. The texture became really smooth and dense, and those terrifying teenage spikes actually eroded and shrank down into small, blunt knobs. It's basically the most extreme physical makeover in history.
Moving right along to fact number 9, the century-long Troodon mix-up. The scientific history of this animal is honestly just as wild as its biology. Way back in 1856, a scientist named Joseph Leidy found a mysterious serrated tooth and named it Troodon. Decades later, in 1931, Charles Gilmore found a domed skull and, thinking the teeth matched, named it Troodon wyomensis. Even when Brown and Schleicher officially established the name Pachycephalosaurus in 1943, the taxonomic confusion just kept going. Unbelievably, it wasn't until 1987, over 130 years after that first tooth was found, that paleontologist Phil Currie finally proved that the original Troodon tooth actually belonged to a completely different, bird-like carnivore. That finally separated the two dinosaurs once and for all.
And finally, we arrive at fact number 10, the Hell Creek neighbors. Where did this dynamic, head-butting shapeshifter actually live? Well, Pachycephalosaurus thrived at the very end of the late Cretaceous, in the Maastrichtine Age, roughly 66 to 70 million years ago. It lived in a lush, subtropical ecosystem of forested swamps in what is now western North America. Places like the famous Hell Creek Formation. And get this, they shared this environment with some of the most iconic heavy hitters in the entire fossil record. We're talking about living right alongside the horned Triceratops, the walking tank Ankylosaurus, the giant duck-billed Edmontosaurus, and of course trying to avoid the undisputed apex predator of their time, Tyrannosaurus rex.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We started with a pretty simple picture, right? A dome-headed dinosaur crashing into things. But through microscopic bone analysis, 3D modeling, and sheer paleontological detective work, we've uncovered a dynamic, shape-shifting creature that completely fooled scientists into thinking it was 3 entirely different species. So if the ultimate dinosaur battering ram could hide its true identity for over a century, what other known facts in the fossil record are just sitting there, waiting to be completely rewritten? Science has never settled. It's an ever-evolving story. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep looking closer, and I'll see you next time.